He abandoned her at the altar because she was not the ideal wife. He believed he was choosing the road to power and success. But what he did not know was that he was also shaping her future. He never imagined that in that future, she would return to his world, arm in arm with the only man who could ever make him bow. This is the story of how she turned the worst day of her life into the ultimate checkmate. If you believe in sweet justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss the stories we have coming. We love our global community, so drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. But this story is more than just revenge. What do you do when you hold all the cards? Do you crush the man who broke you, or do you let karma do its work? The choice she made will surprise you. The world Maya and Alex built was small, but it felt infinite. It was contained within the four walls of their first apartment, a space that smelled perpetually of fresh paint, new beginnings, and the shared scent of their intertwined ambitions. This world was illuminated by the soft, steady glow of her laptop screen deep into the night, where her vibrant designs breathed life into his stark, monochrome business proposals. She believed in their world. She believed in us. With a certainty that felt as solid as the foundation of the building they lived in, Maya believed their love was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. Sun-drenched memories flickered through her mind with the warmth of a vintage film reel. There was Maya, perched precariously on a stepladder, her laughter echoing in the empty room as she playfully swiped a streak of alabaster paint across Alex's nose. There was Alex catching her hand midair, his touch a familiar current of electricity that grounded her. They were a tangle of limbs on a half-assembled sofa, the blueprints for their future, both professional and personal, scattered around them like fallen autumn leaves. He was the architect of their success. She was the artist who gave it color and form. One night, the city lights of the skyline glittering like a carpet of fallen stars, Alex had pulled her away from her screen. His eyes, usually sharp and focused on profit margins and projections, were soft. He traced the lines of the logo she was crafting, a delicate, intricate design for his latest pitch. "See?" he whispered, his voice filled with a genuine admiration that made her heart swell. "We're the perfect team. My business brain, your artistic eye. We're going to conquer the world, Maya." And she had leaned into him, inhaling his scent of confidence and clean cotton, believing every single word. That fortress of us felt unbreachable. But every fortress has a weak point. Theirs was Sunday dinner. The Peterson family mansion was not a home. It was a statement. A cold, sprawling monument to old money and rigid expectations, where her apartment was a canvas of warm chaos and creativity. This house was a museum of silent judgment. Marble floors gleamed with a sterile polish, ancestral portraits watched from the walls with disapproving eyes, and the air was thick with the scent of lemon-scented cleaner and unspoken disappointment. For Maya, crossing the threshold was like stepping into a different climate, one where the oxygen was thinner, forcing her to take shallow, careful breaths. Tonight, the air was particularly thin. Mrs. Peterson, a woman sculpted from ice and iron will, held court at the head of the long mahogany table. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, a perfect curve that never once reached the cold calculation in her eyes. And tonight, those eyes were fixed on Maya. "Tiffany just returned from Switzerland," Mrs. Peterson announced to the table, though her words were clearly aimed. The clinking of silverware momentarily ceased. "She's become fluent in French, of course, and is now running her family's entire charity foundation. Such an impressive, well-rounded young woman." There was a deliberate pause, a silence that Maya was meant to fill. Mrs. Peterson turned her head, the movement slow and predatory. "And what about you, Maya?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Still doodling on that little computer of yours?" The word doodling was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to belittle, to reduce her passion and her profession to a child's hobby. A hot flush of shame and anger crept up Maya's neck. She felt Alex's leg tense beside hers under the table. This was it. This was the moment he would defend her. Defend us. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. Alex offered a tight, uncomfortable laugh. "Mom, you know Maya's a graphic designer. She's incredibly talented." He then immediately pivoted, deflecting the tension instead of confronting it. Did you hear about the new merger Henderson Corp is considering? I think Dad would be interested in the Q3 projections. He didn't defend her. He managed her. He changed the subject. In that moment, Maya felt the first hairline crack form in the walls of their fortress. She looked down at her plate, the perfectly cooked meal suddenly tasteless. The gleam of the heavy silver fork in her hand seemed to mock the simple, creative world she cherished. The crack deepened 2 weeks later. Alex chose a place of breathtaking beauty, a secluded botanical garden at sunset, the air fragrant with night-blooming jasmine. He looked impossibly handsome, his nervousness making him seem younger, more vulnerable than the driven businessman she knew. When he dropped to one knee, pulling out a velvet box that revealed a diamond that glittered with painful intensity, Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was the dream, the culmination of everything they had built. But then he spoke, and his words were not the unconditional declaration she expected. His voice was strained, a quiet tremor running beneath the surface. "Maya, I love you more than anything," he began, his eyes searching hers, not with pure adoration, but with a strange, desperate plea. "But I need you to promise me something." He paused, and the beautiful moment was suddenly charged with a heavy, unspoken weight. "Just promise me you'll try. You'll try harder, to fit in more. For us." For us. The words were a beautiful trap. He wasn't asking her to be someone else for him. He was framing it as a sacrifice for their shared future. It was a condition disguised as a commitment. Drunk on the romance of the moment, blinded by the dazzling diamond and the future it represented, Maya ignored the blaring alarm bell in her soul. She saw his request not as a rejection of who she was, but as a testament to how much their future together meant to him. "Yes," she whispered, tears blurring the perfect sunset. "Yes, of course, I'll try." As he slid the cold, heavy ring onto her finger, the joy she felt was pierced by a tiny, sharp splinter of dread. She should have seen it for what it was. It wasn't a proposal, it was a warning. He wasn't proposing to Maya, the artist, the partner who doodled her way into his success. He was proposing to a polished, imaginary version of her he hoped she could become. A woman who would finally be suitable. And in her desperate desire to protect the fortress of us, she had just handed him the keys to the gate. The morning of her wedding day dawned in a haze of white silk and pale sunlight. In the bridal suite, a space that felt suspended between dream and reality, Maya was a vision of radiant happiness. The air hummed with a quiet, joyful energy, scented with hairspray and the delicate fragrance of the white peonies clutched in a vase nearby. Her best friend and maid of honor, Chloe, stood beside her, a steady, calming presence amidst the flurry of preparation. Chloe adjusted the delicate lace on Maya's shoulder, her smile genuine and warm. "Breathe, Maya," Chloe said softly, her eyes meeting Maya's in the ornate mirror. "You look absolutely breathtaking, like you stepped out of a fairy tale." Maya let out a shaky, happy laugh. The reflection staring back at her was almost a stranger, a polished, serene woman on the brink of her forever. The heavy satin of the gown felt like a promise. The veil, light as a whisper, was a soft focus filter on a perfect day. Every detail was an affirmation of the life she was about to step into, the final triumphant cementing of the fortress of us. She felt an overwhelming wave of love for the man she was about to marry, the architect of their shared world. The promise she had made to him, to try harder, to fit in, felt like a small, insignificant price to pay for a lifetime of this kind of happiness. At the same time, miles away in a sterile, impersonal hotel suite, Alex was pacing. The room was a study in gray and chrome, devoid of any warmth or personality. He moved like a caged animal, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed rhythmically in his cheek. His perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket was thrown carelessly over a chair, his bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck. He ignored the untouched glass of whiskey sweating onto the polished side table. His world, once a clear blueprint of ambition and success, had become a labyrinth of impossible choices. His phone buzzed against the marble countertop, a venomous, insistent sound. He snatched it up, his thumb hovering over the screen before he finally answered. His mother's voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the room with the chilling precision of a scalpel. Alexander, I trust you are coming to your senses. Alex's breath hitched. He walked to the window, staring down at the city below without really seeing it. Mother, I can't do this to her, he said, his voice low and strained. The guests are arriving. Everyone is waiting. A sigh, cold and impatient, crackled through the speaker. You can endure the disappointment of one day, or you can live in a lifetime of regret. This isn't about one day. It's about the rest of your life. Tiffany and her family are your future. Her connections, her background, that is the world you were born to inhabit. Do not throw it all away for an unsuitable girl, Alexander. The word echoed in the sterile room. Unsuitable. The same word that had haunted Maya, now being used as the final justification for his betrayal. He closed his eyes. On one side was Maya, her warmth, her creativity, her unwavering belief in him. On the other was the cold, hard monolith of his family's expectations, a future pre-approved and guaranteed. I love her, he whispered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Love is a luxury, his mother retorted, her voice devoid of any emotion. Success is a necessity. Make the right choice. The line went dead. Alex stood frozen for a long moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, before his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The architect had just condemned his own creation. Back at the church, the grand organ music, which had filled the vaulted stone ceilings with triumphant sound, began to falter. It played a few more strained notes, then faded into an echoing, cavernous silence. The change was abrupt, unnatural. A nervous murmur rippled through the pews, a quiet whisper that grew into a wave of confused chatter. At the end of the long crimson aisle, Maya stood alone. Her father had just let go of her arm, preparing to hand her off, but there was no one there to receive her. Her smile, which had been so radiant moments before, began to feel heavy, a fragile mass threatening to crack. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Where was he? She scanned the sea of faces, searching for an explanation, but found only pity, curiosity, and a dawning sense of awkwardness in their eyes. The weight of 100 gazes pressed down on her, suffocating. Then she saw him, not Alex but his best man, Mark, emerging from a side door near the altar. He walked towards her, his head bowed, his steps slow and heavy as if wading through water. The look on his face was one of profound, gut-wrenching shame. He couldn't even meet her eyes. In his hand, he held a single crisp white envelope. Time seemed to slow down. The murmuring of the crowd faded into a dull roar in her ears. Mark stopped in front of her, extending the envelope. It felt like an offering in a nightmare. Maya, I am so sorry, he mumbled, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't process. Her fingers, suddenly numb and clumsy, fumbled as she took the letter. The paper was cold, impersonal. Her hands began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that shook the bouquet of peonies she was still clutching. With a sense of surreal detachment, she opened the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Alex's familiar, sharp handwriting. As her eyes scanned the words, his voice filled her head. It was not the warm, loving voice she knew, but a cold, distant narration, utterly devoid of feeling. Maya, by the time you read this, I will be gone. There is no easy way to say this, so I will be direct. Over the past few months, I have come to a difficult realization. I realize that I love the idea of a successful future more than I love you. Your world is beautiful, but it is not my world, and I am not strong enough to live in it. I'm sorry for being too much of a coward to say this in person. I hope one day you can forgive me. The world tilted on its axis. The words blurred, meaningless ink on a page, yet each one was a physical blow. Coward, unsuitable, not my world. The fortress they had built wasn't just breached, it had been a mirage all along. A hollow boom echoed in her ears. The engagement ring, the beautiful, heavy symbol of a conditional promise, suddenly felt like a shackle. Her fingers went slack. It slipped off, catching the light from the stained glass windows in one last, brilliant flash before it fell. It hit the marble floor with a single, sharp clink, a sound so small yet so final, it seemed to shatter the profound silence of the church. And then her strength gave out completely. The weight of the dress, the stares of the crowd, the crushing public humiliation. It was too much. Her knees buckled. In a swirl of white silk and broken dreams, Maya collapsed onto the cold stone floor, the sound of her own heartbroken sob the only thing left in the ruins of her perfect day. The apartment, once a vibrant canvas of their shared future, had become a tomb. The sun-drenched space where they had laughed and dreamed was now a suffocating cavern of grief, shrouded in darkness. Heavy curtains were drawn tight, blocking out a world that had the audacity to keep moving. The air, thick and stale, was a nauseating cocktail of stale pizza, dust, and the ghost of Alex's expensive cologne that still clung stubbornly to a throw pillow on the sofa. This was Maya's new world, four walls and a silence so profound it screamed. For days she remained on the sofa, a catatonic figure in the gloom. She wore the same oversized sweatshirt, her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes, once bright with creativity, were vacant. They were fixed on the television screen, a polished black mirror that reflected nothing but a hollowed-out version of herself. The remote lay just out of reach, but she had no desire to turn it on. The silence was punishing, but the thought of hearing another human voice, another story, another life, was unbearable. The fortress of us had not just fallen, its ruins had collapsed inward, burying her alive. Alex's final words, written in that cold, detached script, played on a merciless loop in her mind. Unsuitable, not my world, coward. Each word was a fresh shovel of dirt on her grave. Chloe came on the third day, using the spare key Maya had given her ages ago. She entered quietly, her usual vibrant energy immediately subdued by the oppressive atmosphere of the room. Her eyes, wide with concern, took in the scene, the discarded food containers, the closed curtains, and the ghost-like figure of her best friend. She moved softly, her footsteps muffled on the rug, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Maya," she whispered, her voice a gentle probe into the silence. There was no response. Chloe sighed, her heart aching. She placed a bag of groceries on the clean corner of the kitchen counter, an island of order in a sea of chaos. She tried to coax Maya, her voice soft and patient. "I brought you soup. You need to eat something. Please, May, just a little." She sat on the edge of the coffee table, reaching out to touch Maya's arm. The contact was meant to be comforting, but Maya flinched as if struck. For the first time, Maya's lips parted, and a sound, fragile and raspy, emerged from her throat. "He was right," she whispered, her gaze still locked on the black screen. "I'm not good enough." The words were a visceral blow, worse than any scream or sob. Chloe felt a cold knot of fury tighten in her stomach. This was the poison. This was the lie that Mrs. Peterson had cultivated and Alex had validated. It had seeped into Maya's very soul, and gentle comfort was not the antidote. Seeing that her soft approach was useless, Chloe retreated, leaving the soup on the table, knowing it would go untouched. She returned 2 days later. There was no softness in her this time. Her patience had evaporated, replaced by a volatile, protective anger. She didn't knock. She unlocked the door and slammed it shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent apartment. Maya didn't even flinch. Chloe marched across the room in 3 long strides. With a furious grunt, she grabbed the heavy curtains and ripped them apart. Harsh, unforgiving sunlight flooded the room, striking the dust motes and illuminating the full extent of the squalor. Maya cried out, shielding her eyes from the sudden, painful brightness. The world she had tried to block out had just invaded her sanctuary of misery. "Enough!" Chloe's voice was sharp, a command, not a suggestion. "Enough of this. I am not going to stand by and watch you let that pathetic coward and his Ice Queen mother win." Maya stared at her, bewildered, the light still searing her retinas. "What are you talking about? Win? They've already won." "No!" Chloe's voice rose. She grabbed a stack of business and society magazines she'd brought with her and threw them down on the coffee table. They landed with a loud, aggressive slap. On the covers were glossy images of powerful, smiling women, CEOs, entrepreneurs, artists, symbols of the world that continued to turn. They win if you stay here, in the dark, buried in their judgment. They win if you believe for one more second that you are not good enough. She leaned in close, her eyes blazing with a fierce loyalty. Do you want to sit here and marinate in your own pain while he and his mother are clinking champagne glasses, toasting their perfect, strategic future? While they celebrate getting rid of the unsuitable girl, the word hung in the air, a shared venomous memory. So you know what you're going to do? Chloe continued, her voice dropping to a low, intense hiss. You are not going to get revenge. Revenge is beneath you. You are going to outdo him. You are going to take all this pain and all this anger and all this incredible talent you have, and you are going to build a life so goddamn successful that you become news he can't avoid reading. You will become a headline on one of these. She slapped the magazines again for emphasis, and he will have to see it. He will have to know that leaving you was the single stupidest mistake of his miserable, calculated life. Silence descended again, but this time it was different. It was charged, electric. The air crackled with the force of Chloe's words. Maya looked down at the magazines. She saw the confident faces of the women staring back at her. They were not defined by who they loved or who left them. They were defined by what they had built. Tears began to stream down Maya's face again, but they were not the slow, hopeless tears of the past few days. These were hot, angry tears, a cleansing fire. Each drop that hit the glossy pages was a release of the victim she had become, and a baptism for the woman she was about to be. The pain was still there, a raw, gaping wound in her chest, but now something else was there beside it. It was a cold, hard, and unfamiliar feeling, but she recognized it instantly. It was rage, and in that rage, a tiny, resilient seed of determination began to sprout. The first day of Maya's new life began not with a plan, but with a purge. The rage that Chloe had ignited was a roaring inferno, and it demanded fuel. She moved through the apartment, the tomb of her past life, with a brutal cleansing efficiency. Every trace of Alex was an enemy to be vanquished. His clothes were ripped from the closet and stuffed unceremoniously into black trash bags. His expensive toiletries were swept from the bathroom counter into a bin. The framed photo of them, smiling on a beach, was not gently put away. She shattered the glass against the edge of a table and threw the pieces out. This wasn't about sorrow anymore. This was about reclamation. When the physical space was purged of him, she turned on the space they had shared. The living room with its comfortable sofa where they had mapped out their future was now hostile territory. With a guttural cry of exertion, she shoved the heavy sofa against the far wall, scraping a long, angry scar into the hardwood floor. She didn't care. Scars were a part of her now. In the newly opened space, she set up her command center, a simple desk, her powerful laptop, and her drawing tablet. The apartment was no longer a home built for two. It was now a workshop for one. For days, she fueled herself with coffee and fury, channeling the chaotic energy of her grief into work. She took on small, anonymous freelance jobs online, designing logos for companies she'd never heard of, for pennies on the dollar. The work was mindless, but it was a lifeline. It proved her hands could still create. It proved her mind could still focus on something other than the echoing clink of a ring on a marble floor. The idea came to her during one of these late nights, somewhere between the third cup of coffee and the false dawn. She was exhausted, staring at a blank screen, feeling the familiar tendrils of despair begin to creep back in. She had no name, no direction, no identity beyond the girl who was left at the altar. He had called her unsuitable. His mother had called her unsuitable. Their entire world was built on a curated image, a performance of success. And she had almost suffocated trying to play a part that wasn't written for her. Her hand, acting on instinct, reached for a stray paper napkin on her desk. She picked up a pen and, with a few swift, decisive strokes, sketched a logo. It was a simple, elegant design, her own initials, M.A., intertwined in a way that was both fluid and strong. Below it, she wrote two words, not as a brand name, but as a declaration of war, a personal manifesto, authentic designs. She stared at the words. Authenticity, It was the very thing she had been asked to sacrifice. It was the core of her art, the part of her that they had deemed a liability. Now it would be her armor. It would be her weapon. She named the company Authentic Designs because it was a constant, searing reminder to herself. Never again. Never again would she contort herself into a shape that didn't fit. Never again would she apologize for who she was. Her authenticity was not her weakness, it was her power. With a name came a new terrifying phase, the hunt. The anonymous online gigs weren't enough. She needed real clients, a real business. The first weeks were a brutal education in rejection. She spent hours crafting personalized emails to local businesses, her proposals showcasing the very best of her work. Most went unanswered, lost in the digital void. The few responses she received were curt and dismissive. "We are not looking for new design services at this time. Your portfolio is impressive, but we have decided to go in a different direction." Each rejection was a small echo of that ultimate rejection in the church. The temptation to crawl back into the darkness was immense. But then she would see Chloe's face in her mind, hear her furious, loving words, and she would force herself to send one more email. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely of places, a small local coffee shop called The Daily Grind, whose owner, a perpetually tired-looking man named Frank, was overwhelmed and on the verge of closing. He couldn't afford a big agency. He saw her email, saw the passion in her proposal, and offered her a pittance to freshen things up. Maya treated that small job as if it were the most important commission of her life. She didn't just design a new logo, she immersed herself in his business. She spent days at the shop, observing the customers, tasting the coffee, understanding the story Frank wanted to tell. She worked day and night, fueled by a creative fire she hadn't felt in years. She created an entire brand identity for him, a warm, rustic logo that felt like a comforting hug, new menus that were clean and inviting, and even designs for custom coffee cups. When she presented it to Frank, he was speechless. He stared at the designs, his tired eyes welling up with tears. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is what I always imagined, but never knew how to say. You saw it." Frank became her most vocal champion. He told everyone who would listen about the brilliant young designer who had saved his business. A week later, the owner of a boutique down the street called Maya. Then a new local restaurant. The work, once a trickle, was becoming a steady stream. Her apartment was no longer a silent workshop. It was a hive of activity, buzzing with client calls and the constant click of her keyboard. The day soon came when she was staring at 3 deadlines at once, the workload finally becoming impossible for one person to handle. With a mix of terror and exhilaration, she hired her first employee, a recent design graduate named Liam, who was eager and talented. The living room suddenly felt cramped, too small for the ambition it now contained. Her final act of transformation was to sign a lease for a small, 2-desk space in a vibrant, open-plan co-working building downtown. The day she moved her equipment in, she stood by the large window, looking out over the bustling city. The space was bright, filled with the low hum of other people's dreams and ambitions. It was the absolute antithesis of the dark, silent apartment where she had hidden from the world. She had taken her deepest humiliation and forged it into a new reality. Authentic Designs wasn't just a company anymore. It was her resurrection. Authentic Designs was no longer just a name on a napkin. It was a living, breathing entity. Maya's small office in the co-working space was a crucible of controlled chaos, humming with the energy of creation. Her reputation for delivering sharp, insightful work had spread through the local business community like wildfire. She was finally standing on ground she had built herself, and it felt solid, real. The next logical step was to test its strength against a true challenge. That challenge was Henderson Corp. Landing a presentation with Henderson Corp was a monumental victory in itself. They were a mid-level corporate giant, a monolithic presence in the city's business landscape, the kind of client that could catapult a boutique agency like hers into a new league. This wasn't just about the money, it was about validation. It was a chance to prove on a major stage that her vision and her company had real power. For 2 weeks, she and Liam worked relentlessly, sleeping in shifts, their world shrinking to the glow of their computer screens and the scent of stale coffee. They deconstructed Henderson's bland, outdated branding and rebuilt it from the ground up, creating a proposal that was not only beautiful, but audacious, intelligent, and undeniably authentic. The night before the presentation, Maya stood before the large window in her office, looking down at the city lights. She felt a nervous, electric hum under her skin. The thrill of the fight. This was it, the culmination of months of relentless work, a definitive answer to the ghosts of her past. She was no longer the unsuitable girl. She was a contender. The call came just as she was packing her bag to go home for a few precious hours of sleep. It wasn't her phone that rang, but Liam's. He answered, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to confusion, and then to a dark, thunderous anger. He listened for another moment, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone, and then hung up without saying goodbye. "That was Chloe," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She just got a message from an old mutual friend of hers and Alex's." A familiar cold dread coiled in Maya's gut. The past, which she had fought so hard to bury, had a nasty habit of crawling out of its grave. Liam took a breath, his eyes meeting hers, filled with a protective fury. Alex had dinner last night with one of the board members from Henderson Corp, a friendly catch-up, and during their conversation, he just happened to accidentally mention you. Liam's voice dripped with sarcasm. He told the board member he was so worried about you, that you've been going through a difficult time since the wedding. He said he was concerned that taking on a major project like this might be too much for you, and that you might not be entirely reliable at the moment. The words struck Maya with the force of a physical blow. It was insidious. It was brilliant in its cruelty. He hadn't slandered her work. He had attacked her stability, planting a seed of doubt using a twisted, poisonous version of concern. He had used her most profound moment of pain as a corporate weapon against her. He didn't just want to move on, he wanted to ensure she could never rise to his level. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. The initial shock was quickly consumed by a white-hot, clarifying rage. The official email came an hour later. A sterile, polite message thanking her for her efforts. But Henderson Corp had decided to postpone their rebranding initiative indefinitely. It was a lie, a corporate platitude to avoid confrontation. She had lost. The contract was gone. Liam started pacing, cursing Alex, his mother, and the entire corporate world. But Maya stood perfectly still. The woman who had collapsed on the marble floor of a church would have been shattered. But that woman was gone. This Maya felt the sting, the bitter taste of injustice. But she did not break. The foundation she had built was stronger than that. This was not the end. It was merely a declaration of war from a coward she had once loved. The opportunity came 2 days later, disguised as an industry newsletter. Croft Industries, a global titan, a corporate behemoth that made Henderson Corp look like a corner store, had unexpectedly parted ways with its longtime advertising agency. They were looking for a complete brand overhaul. It was the kind of contract that agencies 10 times her size would kill for. It was impossible. She was a minnow swimming in a sea of sharks. Liam saw the look in her eye. "Maya, no, it's too big. They won't even look at us." "They will if we don't give them a choice," she replied, her voice calm and steely. She wasn't thinking about winning. She was thinking about refusing to lose. The day of the presentation was a masterclass in intimidation. The Croft Industries boardroom was a cavernous space on the top floor of a skyscraper, with a 30-foot mahogany table that felt like a sacrificial altar. Maya and Liam sat at the far end, a small, insignificant island in a sea of expensive suits. One by one, representatives from massive, legendary agencies presented. They unveiled slick, glossy slideshows filled with corporate jargon, focus group data, and soulless, generic concepts. They spoke of synergizing demographics and leveraging brand momentum. Maya watched the man at the head of the table. He had to be Julian Croft, the enigmatic founder and CEO. He looked to be in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were clouded over with a profound weariness. He slumped in his chair, looking utterly bored, occasionally glancing at his watch as the presenters droned on. He was a king in a court of jesters, and he was tired of the show. Finally, it was her turn. Liam set up the laptop, the first slide of their beautiful presentation glowing on the massive screen. Maya walked to the front of the room, took the remote clicker, and turned the screen off. A confused silence fell over the room. Julian Croft, who had been staring out the window, slowly turned his head, a flicker of curiosity in his tired eyes. Maya looked directly at him, ignoring everyone else. "Good afternoon. My company is called Authentic Designs, and I'm not going to show you a single slide today." She took a step forward, her voice clear and steady, filling the vast room. Because a brand isn't a logo or a slogan projected on a wall. It isn't data from a focus group. A brand is the truth. It's a story. And for the past 30 years, you've let other people tell a boring, corporate version of your story. She began to walk alongside the table, her gaze never leaving Julian Croft. The truth about Croft Industries isn't in your quarterly reports. It's in the legacy of the first workshop your father started. It's in the relentless innovation that has kept you 10 steps ahead of your competitors for decades. It's about heritage and forward motion, existing at the same time. That is the story we should be telling. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not how these meetings were supposed to go. But Julian Croft did something no one had seen him do all day. He leaned forward. He placed his elbows on the table, steepled his fingers, and for the first time, he looked directly at Maya, his eyes sharp, focused, and completely, utterly engaged. The king had finally found something real in his court. Winning the Croft Industries account was like capturing lightning in a bottle. It was a victory so monumental, so utterly improbable, that it left Maya feeling both electrified and terrified. The real work began the day after the celebratory champagne she and Liam had shared. Julian Croft was not a man who believed in wasting time. He had been starved for authenticity, and now that he had found it, he was ravenous. Their work sessions were not the sterile, formal meetings she had imagined. They became an intense, exhilarating dance of two powerful intellects. They took over a small, sunlit conference room in the Croft Tower, a space that quickly became littered with sketches, coffee cups, and the vibrant energy of their collaboration. They would spend hours debating the precise shade of blue for the new logo, the cadence of a single line of copy, or the emotional impact of a photograph. Julian, the weary king she had seen in the boardroom, was gone. In his place was a sharp, engaged, and surprisingly witty partner. He would challenge her ideas not to diminish them, but to strengthen them. He would listen, truly listen, as she defended her creative choices with a fierce, articulate passion. It was a partnership unlike any she had ever known. With Alex, she had been the supporting artist, the one who added color to his pre-drawn lines. He praised her work, but he never truly engaged with her process. With Julian, she was an equal. He respected her mind as much as her talent. They would argue, their voices rising with passion, only to break into shared laughter moments later when one of them conceded a point. In these moments, a deep, unspoken respect began to form, a bond forged in the crucible of creative conflict. One evening, after a particularly grueling 12-hour session, Julian looked up from a series of font options, his eyes tired but alight with satisfaction. "We've been living on coffee and takeout for a week," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let me buy you a proper dinner. You've more than earned it." They went to a quiet, elegant restaurant downtown, a place with dark wood, soft lighting, and an atmosphere that encouraged conversation rather than performance. For the first time, they sat across from each other not as client and consultant, but simply as two people. The conversation drifted away from branding and logistics, becoming more personal. Maya found herself fascinated by the man behind the corporate titan. He spoke of his early struggles, the risks he had taken, and the immense pressure of upholding his father's legacy. Then his gaze softened, looking at something far beyond the candlelit table. "You remind me of my wife," he said quietly. The statement hung in the air, simple and profound. Maya didn't know what to say. "She passed away 5 years ago," he continued, a gentle sadness coloring his tone. "She was a concert pianist, a true artist. She had this fire inside her, an absolute refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. This world," he gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings, "the corporate world, it tries to extinguish that kind of fire in people. It demands conformity. It polishes everyone down to the same dull shine. But she never let it touch her. She was pure, unapologetic authenticity. He paused, taking a sip of his wine, and then his sharp, intelligent eyes met hers across the table. I see that same fire in you, Maya. I saw it the moment you turned off that projector. You weren't there to perform. You were there to tell the truth. His words were a key, unlocking a part of her she had kept barricaded since her wedding day. The vulnerability he showed her, the trust he placed in her by sharing the memory of his wife, made her feel, for the first time in a long time, completely safe. The story of her own humiliation, a story she had only ever shared with Chloe, rose to her lips. Hesitantly at first, and then with a quiet, cathartic rush, she told him everything. She told him about the Sunday dinners, the constant, subtle pressure to change, the conditional proposal, and the final brutal humiliation in the church. She spoke of Alex's note, the word unsuitable branding her soul. As she spoke, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a survivor recounting a battle. Julian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, but his focus absolute. When she finished, there was a long silence. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He simply nodded, a look of profound understanding in his eyes. He didn't leave you because you were unsuitable, he said, his voice firm and cold as steel. He left you because you were too much for him. He was a coward who was terrified of your fire, so he tried to put it out. In that moment, the professional respect between them deepened into something far more significant. A genuine human connection, forged not just in shared creativity, but in shared truth. The aftershock of their new partnership was beginning to send tremors through the city's business circles. A few days later, Alex Peterson, having heard the impossible news, found his way to Julian's office. He used his father's name to get past the executive assistant, a move that already reeked of desperation. Julian's office was a corner suite with panoramic views of the city, a space that radiated quiet, absolute power. Alex stood in the center of the vast Persian rug, looking small and out of place. "Mr. Croft," Alex began, his voice strained with false sincerity. "Thank you for seeing me. I came here out of concern. I understand you've hired Maya Andrews' company." Julian looked up from a document on his desk, his expression impassive. "Authentic Designs, yes. They're doing remarkable work." "Yes, well, that's the thing," Alex stammered, wringing his hand slightly. "Sir, I just feel it's my duty to warn you. Hiring my former fiancé could be perceived as a conflict of interest. Given our history, her judgment might be clouded. I'm just worried that her personal feelings might interfere with her professionalism." Julian Croft slowly placed his pen down. He leaned back in his large leather chair and fixed Alex with a gaze so cold it could have frozen mercury. The weariness was gone, replaced by a glacial contempt. "Mr. Peterson," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft, yet it cut through the room like a razor. "My only interest is results, and Authentic Designs is delivering exceptional results. My personal life, and by extension, Miss Andrews's, is not your concern." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps you should focus more on your own work, and less on the affairs of a woman who has clearly moved on to bigger and better things. Now, if you'll excuse me." He gestured dismissively toward the door, a silent, absolute command. Alex's face flushed a deep, humiliating red. He had come to sabotage, to plant his poison one last time. Instead, he had been swatted away like an insignificant fly. He turned and walked out of the office, utterly defeated, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him with a sound of profound finality. The grand ballroom of the Croft Industries Gala was another world, a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and quiet, concentrated power. The air was a refined symphony of expensive perfume, fine champagne, and the low, confident hum of the city's elite. A year ago, Maya would have felt like an intruder here, a fraud in a borrowed dress, her every move scrutinized, her every word measured. She would have clung to Alex's arm, a nervous accessory, desperately trying to remember the names and affiliations of the people she was introduced to. Tonight, she was not an accessory. She was the epicenter of her own gravity. She stood beside Julian Croft, not behind him, an equal partner in the quiet command they held over the room. Her dress was a column of emerald silk, a bold, elegant statement. It wasn't chosen to impress or to fit in. It was chosen because she loved it. On her left hand, a magnificent diamond ring, Julian's ring, sparkled with a clear, steady fire, a symbol not of a condition, but of an unconditional partnership. She felt Julian's hand rest gently on the small of her back, a gesture of quiet support, of shared strength. She was not performing. She was simply being. Their presence had not gone unnoticed. Whispers followed them as they moved through the room, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. The story of how the unknown authentic designs had snatched the most coveted contract in the city from the jaws of the industry giants was already becoming a legend. The first ghost of her past arrived in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and condescension. Mrs. Peterson materialized before them, her smile as perfectly constructed and dangerously sharp as a shard of glass. Her eyes swept over Maya, taking in the dress, the confidence, the man at her side, and a flicker of confusion warred with her innate smugness. "Maya, dear," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise to see you here. I must say, you clean up remarkably well." It was a backhanded compliment designed to remind Maya of her unsuitable origins. Maya met her gaze without flinching, her own smile calm and genuine. "Mrs. Peterson, it's a pleasure to see you too." There was no anger in her voice, only a cool, unbothered serenity that seemed to unsettle the older woman more than any retort would have. Mrs. Peterson's eyes flicked to Julian, dismissing Maya as she turned to the real power in the grouping. "Julian, wonderful to see you. I'm Amelia Peterson. My husband is on the board of—" Julian cut her off smoothly, his smile polite but his eyes like ice. He tightened his arm protectively around Maya. "A pleasure, Amelia. I'm glad you have a chance to say hello." He looked down at Maya with an expression of such profound, undisguised love that it momentarily silenced the entire conversation around them. "I'd like to properly introduce you to my fiancé, Maya Andrews." The word, fiancé, was a perfectly executed checkmate. It landed with the force of a physical blow. Mrs. Peterson's practiced smile froze on her lips. The color drained from her perfectly powdered face, leaving behind a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The condescension in her eyes was instantly replaced by a frantic, panicked calculation. She had tried to discard Maya like a piece of trash, only to find her enthroned in the one kingdom she couldn't conquer. Before she could recover, the second wave of the past arrived. Alex and Tiffany. Tiffany was exactly as Maya had imagined, beautiful, poised, and exuding an aura of effortless privilege. She was a perfect specimen from the world Mrs. Peterson so admired. But next to her, Alex looked diminished. The confident, ambitious man Maya had once loved was gone. In his place was a man haunted by his choices, his eyes wide with a cocktail of shock, regret, and raw animal fear, as he looked at Maya and the man whose hand rested so possessively on her. "Maya," Alex breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He stumbled through the introductions, his words clumsy, his gaze darting between Maya and Julian like a trapped animal seeking an escape route. Maya endured the excruciatingly awkward exchange with a placid grace that made it all the more painful for him. Finally, she turned to Julian. "Darling, would you mind giving us just one moment?" It was a request, but it held the weight of a command. Julian nodded, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and stepped away to speak with a colleague, his protective gaze never straying far. Now they were alone, cocooned in a small pocket of silence amidst the gala's roar. The pretense fell away from Alex's face, replaced by a desperate, pleading anguish. "Maya, I was wrong," he started, the words rushing out of him. "I was a fool, a complete and utter fool. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." The apology, which she might have once sold her soul to hear, now meant nothing. It was too little, too late, and offered for all the wrong reasons. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a clear, piercing clarity, as if seeing a stranger for the first time. You weren't just a fool, Alex, she said, her voice quiet, but each word sharp and perfectly weighted. You were a coward. He flinched as if she had struck him. A fool makes a mistake, she continued, her voice remaining level, devoid of the hysterical emotion he might have expected. A coward makes a choice to deliberately hurt someone to save himself. You think I don't know what you did with the Henderson contract? You couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding without you, so you tried to burn my world to the ground. You tried to destroy me. The blood drained from his face. He looked utterly exposed, his pathetic act of sabotage laid bare under the glittering chandeliers. But you see, Maya said, taking a small final step back, creating a physical and metaphorical distance between them forever. When you build something that is authentic, something that is real, it doesn't crumble so easily. You built your life on a foundation of your mother's expectations and your own fear. I built mine on my own two hands. She gave him one last dismissive look. It was a look not of anger, but of pity. He was a relic from a past she had long since excavated and moved beyond. Now, if you'll excuse me, she said, her voice crisp and final, my fiancé is waiting. She turned her back on him. She didn't look back to see his face crumble, to watch the full weight of his colossal mistake finally crush him. She didn't need to. She simply walked away, her shoulders straight, her head held high, moving through the glittering crowd towards the man who saw her fire and called it beautiful. She walked towards her future, leaving Alex Peterson to drown in the ruins of the past he had so carefully and so foolishly constructed. As they stepped out of the gilded cage of the ballroom, the cool night air felt like the first breath of a new life. The distant sounds of the city were a gentle hum, a world away from the suffocating whispers and calculated smiles inside. Maya paused on the grand marble steps and inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, cleansing her of the last lingering ghosts of her past. She turned to Julian, a slow, radiant smile spreading across her face, a smile that reached the very depths of her eyes. I feel, she started, the words coming out on a soft, wondrous exhale. I feel free. It was a freedom more profound than she could have imagined. Not just freedom from Alex or from the crushing weight of the Petersons' judgment. It was the freedom to simply exist as herself, without apology or explanation. The freedom she felt that night became the foundation for everything that followed, a bedrock of authenticity upon which they would build their world. Their wedding was not a public spectacle or a strategic merger. It was a quiet, sun-drenched ceremony in the sprawling garden of their new home. There were no crowds of strangers, no photographers jockeying for position. The guests were a small, carefully chosen collection of people who truly loved them. Julian's grown children, a few of his oldest friends, and Maya's small, fiercely loyal circle. Chloe stood beside her as her maid of honor, her dress a simple, elegant blue. As Maya and Julian exchanged their vows, not the flowery, generic promises of fairy tales, but simple, powerful commitments to honor, respect, and champion one another, Chloe's eyes filled with tears. They were not the panicked, angry tears she had shed in Maya's dark apartment. These were tears of pure, unadulterated joy, a shimmering testament to the incredible journey her friend had undertaken. She was witnessing not just a marriage, but a resurrection. There was no ostentatious display of wealth, only an abundance of genuine happiness. Laughter echoed through the trees. The clinking of glasses was a celebration of real connection, and the atmosphere was one of profound, peaceful joy. Maya looked at the faces surrounding her, faces filled with love and warmth, and felt a sense of belonging she had never known in the cold, cavernous rooms of the Peterson mansion. This was not a performance. This was home. Their life together wasn't a grand dramatic opera, but a quiet, beautiful composition. It found its rhythm in the small, shared moments that weave a life into a tapestry of love. Their sanctuary was a beautiful home, with large windows that let in the light, and a wide, comfortable porch that overlooked a garden she was slowly learning to cultivate. One perfect autumn evening, they sat together on that porch. A comfortable, companionable silence settled between them, a silence born not of tension, but of deep understanding. Julian was engrossed in a thick leather-bound book, a small pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. Maya was curled up in a large wicker chair, her tablet resting on her lap. Her stylus moved in swift, confident strokes across the screen as she sketched out a new branding concept, her mind alive with ideas, her creativity flowing unimpeded. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and the distant aroma of wood smoke. She paused, looking up from her work to watch him. He was completely absorbed, a small, contented smile playing on his lips. She thought back to a phrase that had once been used to brand her, to define her, to break her. Not wife material. They used to say she wasn't wife material. And as she sat there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, a profound truth settled over her. They were right. She wasn't the material for a life built on falsehoods and social maneuvering. She was not the right fabric for a marriage that was a business transaction, a union where her own identity was the price of admission. She was not made to be a polished, silent accessory on the arm of a man who was terrified of her fire. She looked down at the vibrant, bold design taking shape on her tablet, then looked at the brilliant, kind man sitting across from her. A man who saw her fire not as a threat, but as the most beautiful thing about her. She was the material of a partner, a creator, a builder of her own world, who had found another builder to share it with. The greatest lesson she had learned, she realized, wasn't how to achieve success in the eyes of others. It was how to define success for herself. Success wasn't the size of a contract or an invitation to a gala. It was this quiet peace, this shared silence, the freedom to create, to love, and to be, all at the same time. And she would never, ever again let someone convince her that their world was too big for her. The truth she had fought so hard to learn was that their world wasn't too big. It had been far, far too small. Julian must have felt her gaze. He looked up from his book, his eyes meeting hers over the rims of his glasses. The love and profound admiration in his expression needed no words. It was a reflection of everything she felt for him. She smiled back, a genuine, peaceful smile that held the strength of all her battles and the serenity of her ultimate victory. In his eyes, she was not just suitable, she was everything. And so we've journeyed together to the end of Maya's story. From a moment of devastating heartbreak and public humiliation, she chose to rise from her own pain. By building a career founded on the core value of authenticity, confronting the ghosts of her past and acts of sabotage, Maya not only achieved brilliant success, but also found true fulfillment, a happiness she defined for herself, alongside a partner who cherished her for exactly who she was. What are your thoughts on Maya's story? Was there a moment or a lesson from her journey that resonated with you? Please don't hesitate to share your feelings in the comments below. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for spending your time listening and staying with the story until the very end. Goodbye for now, and I hope to see you in the next story.